Hi, we're on the range today, so please bear with gunfire in the background. We're also in Missouri, and it's a jungle out there, so I thought I would dress appropriately. Now today the temperature is in the 80s Fahrenheit, and the humidity is in the 80s. So for this time of day, at this time of year, in this part of the country, the weather's actually pretty good. The topic we're discussing today is the concept of shooting a firearm, and instead of pulling the trigger with your trigger finger, pulling the trigger with your middle finger. It's a technique that I've seen a few people do. Recently, quite a few people have asked me about it. So today we'll see if we can shed any light on the advantages and disadvantages of shooting a firearm that way. But there's one very important point of discussion that we have to discuss before we get to any demonstration and testing. And that is, when we're talking about pulling a trigger with your middle finger, we're going to end up having a lot of middle fingers, and a lot of people are going to get upset about that, and it will bring out a whole bunch of juvenile behavior. So please, before anybody gets excited, okay, everybody, peace, here's your share. We've also had some problems with our audio. For example, can you hear this? No, I'll turn it up for you. We've also had a little bit of problems with wind on the range, such as, okay. Now that we've gotten that out of our systems, let's get serious and let's go to the targets. I've got 3 targets set up, and I'm going to shoot them from a distance of 3 yards. I'll be using my Beretta M922. Now you'll see that this holster has a thumb brake system. In the interest of brevity, I'm not going to re-engage that between each shot. So let's see how we do just point shooting, pulling the trigger with my index finger. Now we'll move to our second target and we'll do the same drill, but this time pulling the trigger with my middle finger. Something I'm noticing is that it makes handling the decock lever a little more difficult. Now let's try one more technique. Now let's take a close-up look at the targets. In our first target, you can see that they're all on there. I think I may have missed it once. And remember, this is a half-size silhouette, but I'm only shooting from 3 yards. And our group, considering that I'm point shooting, is okay. But when we look at our next target, this is pulling the trigger with my middle finger. The group is definitely better. Seems like there might be something to this technique. But let's look at our third target. Now we see that our group is a whole lot better. And was bringing the pistol up to aim really any slower? You be the judge. Now I have some easy shot targets set up that were provided to me by the manufacturer, thank you. And now we'll do the same drill, but I'm going to use my Beretta 92FS caliber 9x19. When pulling the trigger with my middle finger, I only have 2 fingers on the grip of the pistol, which worked fine for a 22, but with the added recoil of the 9mm, let's see how I do now. Okay, pulling the trigger with my trigger finger, not much difference. Now let's see how we do trying to pull the trigger with my middle finger. I'm also finding that using this technique makes it a little harder for me to find the holster, but I'm sure that could be overcome with practice. And now, let's just try our straight presentation. And now let's take a look at the targets. And we see, pulling with the trigger finger, the results aren't that much different. Now, pulling the trigger with the middle finger, again we see that the results are actually better. But just doing a straight presentation, the results are far better. And was bringing the pistol all the way up and aiming really any slower? And if it was slower, was it enough slower to matter? You be the judge. Now let's try something else. In pulling the trigger with your middle finger while doing point shooting, one of the ideas is that if you point at something with your index finger, you're probably pointing pretty close to the center. So if I'm pulling the trigger with my middle finger while pointing at the target with my index finger, I'm probably going to be fairly close to the center of it, and that should improve accuracy during point shooting. And so far, that seems to be the case. We also saw that in going from the 22 to the 9mm, it didn't seem to affect recoil management at all. However, I was only shooting one shot. What if I'm going to shoot multiple shots? Well, now I'm going to shoot from 7 yards, and I have 3 targets set up, and I'll shoot them 1, 2, 3, 3, 2, 1, 1, 2, 3, 3, 2, 1, pulling the trigger with my trigger finger, and then we'll repeat the drill, pulling the trigger with my middle finger, and we'll see how the results compare. Let's take a look at the targets. And here's target number 1, target number 2, and target number 3. So if I did my math right, of a total possible 120, I got a score of 117. Now we'll do that drill again, pulling the trigger with my middle finger, and we'll see how our results compare in terms of accuracy, recoil management, and time. Now let's take a look at our targets. And target number 1, target number 2, and target number 3. So with this finger I got a score of 117. With this finger, 116. And our times looked like this. Enough difference to matter. Let's try something else. Now I'm going to shoot 25 yards from a bench with this Ruger 1022. I've got this blanket here because this rifle does not belong to me. It belongs to one of the crew, and he doesn't want it just laying on the cement. Now I'm going to shoot one group of 10 with my trigger finger, one group of 10 with my middle finger, and we'll see how the groups compare. Let's take a look at the target. And here's our group pulling the trigger with my trigger finger. And that's okay. But if we come over to the group pulling it with my middle finger, we can see that the group is not as good, and it would appear that the center of the group has shifted a little. Now this shot, quite often I'll say that's a flyer, that's just me. No, that was not just me. That's just part of the inconsistency of .22 long rifle ammunition. Now I have two targets set up at a distance of 20 yards, and I'll shoot them as fast as I think I can hit, and I'll shoot the target on the left, pulling the trigger with my trigger finger, the target on the right, pulling the trigger with my middle finger, and we'll see how the results compare. Let's take a look at the targets. And here's our target, pulling the trigger with my trigger finger. And you see a fairly good group, one flyer, and that is just me. Now when it comes to scoring, you can see that this does cut that line, so it does count as a 9. So our score here is 99 out of 100. And here's our group pulling the trigger with my middle finger. And as far as a score, that counts as a 10, that's a 9. That one would really depend on who's scoring your target. So I'm going to say the score here is 99, maybe 98. But we can also see that it's a better group than the group I got pulling with my trigger finger. Now we're back at the 3-yard line, and let's try a revolver. This is a Smith & Wesson Model 63-4, caliber 22 long rifle with an 8-shot swing-out cylinder and a 5-inch barrel. I'll shoot the target on the left, pulling the trigger with my trigger finger, the target on the right, pulling the trigger with my middle finger. Let's see how the results compare. Now let's try the other target. Now let's try this again with the revolver, pulling with the middle finger. Now let's take a look at our targets. And here's our target pulling with my trigger finger, and 7 of our 8 rounds hit the target. And here's our target pulling with my middle finger, and of course I fired more than just 8 shots, and we can see that the shots are all over the place. One of them missed. This one's clear up in the neck, which is technically a hit, but not really what I was going for. Now something to add to this. We saw that in shooting the 10-22, pulling the trigger with the middle finger, my index finger really isn't in the way of much. But for some autoloaders, whether they're rifles or pistols, if you're going to pull the trigger with your middle finger, your index finger might easily get somewhere that you don't want it to be, and you really have to take that into consideration. So the takeaways from everything today, we saw that for close range point shooting, using my middle finger to pull the trigger, at least on the autoloader, seemed to improve my accuracy, and we have to take into account that until yesterday I have never tried shooting any firearm by pulling the trigger with my middle finger. So with basically no practice, I'm already seeing an improvement in accuracy. But we also saw that with the revolver, pulling the trigger with the middle finger was definitely contraindicated. My accuracy was significantly negatively affected. I even managed to catch some of the skin of my finger behind the trigger. Perhaps with a larger frame revolver it might alleviate some of those things, but with the revolver I was using, pulling the trigger with the middle finger, definitely a bad idea. So with everything we've seen today, am I going to go out and start training pulling the trigger with my middle finger? No. But for someone who wants to do point shooting, or for someone who has a compromised index finger, it's injured or perhaps missing, then pulling trigger with the middle finger might be a good idea. So as always, don't try this at home. I'm what you call a professional, and thanks for watching the middle finger video.
And what we have here is a fairly good sized praying mantis. And we'll put a bill up next to him for some perspective. And he's not one for the record books, but as praying mantises go, he's pretty good sized.